The Supreme Court gave an order and President ignored it. And there was no consequence, no punishment, and nothing happened. In 1832, this is exactly what happened when Andrew Jackson just refused to follow the Supreme Court decision. So here's the real question. If the highest court can be ignored, how is it still powerful? What followed became one of the darkest chapters in American history. Five native tribes, Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, Seminole, lived peacefully for generations on the rich farmlands across the five US states: Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and Tennessee. Not just Georgia, all the states wanted the tribes thrown out from their own borders so that the white settlers could settle there and take over the cotton farms and gold mines. In 1830, Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, forced every tribe from the east to the west, now known as Oklahoma. States like Georgia moved aggressively. The governor, Wilson Lumpkin, targeted Cherokee land for removal. In 1832, Cherokee sued the state of Georgia. The Cherokee Nation fought back in the court in a case called Worcester versus Georgia. The Supreme Court ruled clearly. Native lands were protected by federal law and states have no authority there. But President Andrew Jackson refused to enforce the decision. He said, Chief Justice Marshall writes the rule. I control the army. Let him send the troops himself. He refused to send the army troops. There was no protection, no enforcement. States moved ahead anyways. Georgia even ran land lotteries where citizens could win the native land like a prize. And what followed became known as Trial of Tears. Around 60,000 people from these tribes were forced to march over 1,000 miles. More than 15,000 died from cold, disease, and starvation. The law existed, the court had spoken, but power was somewhere else. To understand how this could have happened, we have to go back to the very beginning. That is, in late 70s, 13 colonies fought Britain in the American Revolutionary War. After independence, leaders like George Washington faced a difficult question. Who should control the power now? They had just escaped a king, so they didn't want another king. So, they created a weak system called Articles of Confederation. But that system failed. The government couldn't collect taxes, couldn't control the states, and couldn't handle the crisis like Shai's rebellion. The country was unstable. So, in 1787, leaders met again at United States Constitutional Convention. This time they asked, how do you create a power without letting anyone abuse it? Their answer became United States Constitution. They divided the power into three parts: legislative, who makes the law; executives, who enforces the law; and judiciary, interprets the law. That last group became the Supreme Court. The court was created through the Judiciary Act of 1789. But at first, it wasn't powerful at all. Everything changed in 1803 with Marbury v. Madison. At the end of his presidency, President John Adams appointed several judges. One of them was William Marbury. However, the new administration led by President Thomas Jefferson refused to deliver Marbury's official appointment. So, Marbury went to the Supreme Court asking for a legal order to force the government to deliver his position. The Chief Justice at that time was John Marshall. If the court ordered the government to act and the government refuses, the court would look powerless. So instead, he made a different decision. He said Marbury deserves his position, but the law that allowed him to go directly to the Supreme Court was unconstitutional. Let me explain in simple terms. Marbury went directly to the Supreme Court instead of starting in the lower court. But the Constitution is the highest law of the land. A law cannot give the court extra power that the Constitution never gave it. So, the Supreme Court said that part of the law was invalid. This established a new principle called judicial review, meaning the Supreme Court can declare laws invalid if they violate the Constitution. Because the Constitution is the highest law of land, any law that goes against it cannot be allowed to stand. From this moment, the Supreme Court gained the power to define what is legal and what is not. But the court still had no army, no direct way to enforce its decisions. Its power grew because other branches of government and the public accepted its authority over time. This idea was supported in writings like Federalist Number 78, which argued that the judiciary's strength comes from the judgment, not force. So, the Supreme Court is powerful today, not because it controls force, but because the system chooses to follow its decision. And that raises a deeper question. What happens if one day that choice disappears?